chose qui n'était pas prévue, et donc nous allons pouvoir terminer dans les délais, sauf intensité du débat qui nous conduirait à les prolonger, et donc j'ouvre immédiatement la discussion. Qui demande la parole? Monsieur.
In Germany. I want to make some remarks to the intervention of Mr. Schaldecker, and then one remark to the intervention of the Portuguese colleague. First to Mr. Schaldecker. First of all, you just described the development, and that more or less was based on the assumption that a deficit in general is bad, but it's more the question of the level of the deficit, and the question is therefore if a balanced budget requirement that is not too strict for that purpose to reach sustainability of the budget, which is the main purpose of such constitutional requirements. Secondly, when you described all the theories, you didn't say anything how valid these theories are. And I think one should say something about that, because at least two theories are not very convincing. That's especially the strategic deficit theory that is not empirically supportable, and also the theory on budget cycles is not very true, or doesn't correspond to the reality. In general, one can say, if you look at the developments of the deficits, especially after the Second World War, which is mainly interesting for us, that the real economic developments were much more important for the rise of the deficits. That is true for the first small depression in the 70s when the oil crisis came, and then for the financial crisis that let the deficits explode. And that had nothing to do with the public choice theories at all. What one can say is that the theories you presented to us have mostly the effect that they reduce the possibilities to reduce the deficit after the boost of the deficit. So it has some validity, these theories, but as, in my eyes, a very small one in relation to the real economic development. And the last point I want to make is the question of effectiveness. You said rightly the empirical research shows that the experiences are very mixed. The experiences, especially in the United States, are not very convincing. They are good in Switzerland. And the question is why, and my guess is it's more the political consensus in Switzerland that wants to reduce the deficit that is responsible for the effectiveness of the balanced budget requirement in Switzerland. And besides that, at least in some cantons, the investments are not covered by the balanced budget requirement. So that's an extra venue that can lead to investments. So what I wanted to say is balanced budget requirements are effective when the people and the political powers want it and are convinced of it, but it doesn't work very well if they don't. So that should be always the main question. Secondly, one remark to the Portuguese colleague. You said, when I understood you correctly, that you consider the balanced budget requirement as a principle and you don't want to have it as a rule. But I think that's a wrong concept. The question is, if you constitutionalize such a balanced budget requirement, and then you want to have the Constitutional Court decide on that, what should such a court do when he has to balance all the other, the balanced budget requirement on the one hand side and all the other, let's say, social rights and other political considerations? Shall then the Constitutional Court raise the taxes or raise the deficit, or what should such a court do? So if you wanna establish a balanced budget requirement, you can do it only as a rule. And secondly, I mean, the question, and that's the Constitutional Court, they can't dispense of the hard choice usually Parliament has to make. I mean, you have to finance social expenses and all the other expenses. You can do that either by taxes or you can do it by loans or credit. And either you raise the taxes if you want to spend more money on social questions, or you have to raise the debt, the credit. But then you are dependent on the financial market. And that will look if you are able in the long run to pay for the credit you take. So it's quite needless just to postulate to spend the money. You have to make a hard choice. And the hard choice, I think, should be made by the Parliament and not by constitutional courts. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Dans le prolongement de ce que vous dites, j'ai envie de compléter la question pour notre ami. Comment se fait-il que la théorie économique d'aujourd'hui considère que le déficit budgétaire est fondamentalement mauvais, alors que j'ai des souvenirs de mon vieil ami Lord Keynes qui expliquait qu'un déficit raisonnable était au contraire générateur d'une croissance économique par un effet multiplicateur. Mais ça fait partie des mystères de la théorie dont nous aurons peut-être la réponse tout à l'heure. David.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I also wanted to underline the fact that economically the existence of a budget deficit or otherwise is in fact controversial, and it's something that whether it's a good idea or not, because it was presented as if balanced budget was necessarily a good idea economically, and that's itself extremely controversial. And I would ask Professor Schalthager to elaborate on his reasons for why he thinks the balanced budget is desirable. But my main question was actually to Professor Gosseries, a question around the relationship between intergenerational equity and current generations suffering now. So if we have a question of having to do intergenerational equity, and we have people, for example, who are going to not be able to access adequate food or housing or healthcare, is there no priority in the system that you suggest? It seems to me that there should be a priority for current generational suffering over future potential generational inequity. And I'm interested in your perspective on that question. I know this is a complex issue in for example, in something like Rawlsian theory, but I'm interested in your perspective. I wasn't sure exactly where you were coming from in relation to that. And just a comment, I've come from a developing country, South Africa, and I think it's very interesting because in Europe, a lot of the debate has been very much European around where there's quite a high level of social rights protection. In South Africa, many people are suffering, in many developing countries, from a lack of complete existence of social rights. Children are malnourished, people lack adequate housing, basic health care, and we have a low tax base, for example, in many of these countries as well, which obviously is something we wish to develop. And so the notion of having a balanced budget rule which could constrain expenditure on the most basic goods for individuals seems completely inequitable and wrong from a view that would wish to protect a basic threshold of rights. And I wonder if we also need to distinguish in our thinking around social rights between the basic threshold which ensures protection for individuals living above a level which they would not be able to survive or their very dignity would be affected, and a slightly higher level of protection which ensures their higher level of functioning and being able to flourish in a more decent manner.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Gossry, si vous avez entendu la question, je vais vous donner la réponse, je vais vous donner la parole, pardon, tout de suite pour la réponse, parce que j'ai toujours peur que la technique vous fasse disparaître de notre écran. Alors, si vous voulez répondre tout de suite.
Merci. La technique est relativement fiable, parce qu'elle est un peu la technique constitutionnelle dans certains cas. Just to answer the question, very good question. Do you hear me? Yes? So, very good question. 2 points to answer the question. The main concern for several of the theories of intergenerational equity is the difficulty to justify any form of accumulation. And the basic idea here, sorry?
Yes.
Oh, yes?
Yes, it's good.
And, okay, the basic idea here is a concern for the opportunity cost for the current generation. So, as a first answer to your concern, you don't need a bias in favor of the current generation. A theory of intergenerational justice that is impartial towards all generations, including the current one, can perfectly address your concern. The second point is that you might be right that if you are in a phase of accumulation, so typically, neo-Rawlsian theory will have 2 phases, an accumulation phase and a steady state. And the claim would be, during accumulation, you have a duty to save, and then once you reach a certain threshold, then you have an obligation neither to transfer more to the next generation, nor to transfer less. So the idea is, it is unfair to transfer more to the next generation than what you received from the previous one, and it is unfair towards the least developed members of your own generation. So theories of intergenerational justice are worried about exactly your concern. Now, in terms of Didier, you might be right that in a country that has reached this threshold, a BBR might be justified, whereas you might want to do without BBR during this early stage when you haven't reached this threshold yet. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, restez avec nous. Il y avait d'autres questions. Alors, oui, monsieur. Oui.
Thank you. I'm Tom Ginsberg from the United States. I also have a question along these lines for Professor Grossier, which is, in some sense, I thought your theory doesn't go far enough. That is, once we are going to take intergenerational equity into account, with something like a BBR, I would think that you should go a little further and say that we ought to specify certain amounts of spending for investment as opposed to present-day consumption. And that actually goes to David's question as well. On the other hand, I wonder if your theory isn't overly paternalistic in general. You assume that the current generation can't take future generations' welfare into account. And I wonder if that's really empirically justified, especially in the context of the budget. We're not talking about climate change or something like that. Present generation political citizens have some incentive to make sure their society is doing well for their children and grandchildren.
Monsieur Gossery, c'est de nouveau à vous.
Okay, so I totally agree on the first one. As I said, as part of the three elements I specified for defining the content of a BBR, one of them was to include the spending side. So typically in a public budget we have for budgets that can be easily flagged, you can say 5% for education, 20% for pensions and healthcare that benefits more the elder age groups. Now, you need then to translate that into birth cohorts distribution, which is tricky. Your second point, is it not too paternalistic? I think that the political economy literature seems to show that there are reasons to worry about it. And I think that climate change is a very good example. And I don't see why, if we consider that people don't care enough about the future in the case of climate change, there would be good reasons to think that they care enough about the future generations in the case of budget. One of the elements in the literature is a very good paper by Alesina and Perotti on that. They show that it's mostly the disagreements, typically within a coalition government, the disagreements between the different groups that lead to procrastination, namely that lead to move the hard moments further, and that lead to this tendency of having too high deficits. So I don't think it's paternalistic, I think it's relatively realistic. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Il y avait des questions par ici, monsieur.
Bonjour, Thomas Stauffer de la Suisse. I'll continue in English because I'm more familiar with the vocabulary in English and in French. As this discussion seems to go more and more into the field of political philosophy and not necessarily constitutional law, strictly speaking, I'd like to tender to you two analytical distinctions which perhaps will make things clear for all of us around here at the table. The first thing is that perhaps we have to start with looking at what economists call a closed economy, or a country as an island. In such a case, it's very clear you have a set amount of resources and you can distribute it in many different ways. So you can not have more than you have. And you can finance this reallocation of resources through taxation or expropriation. And it's quite easy. I think where things become more complicated, and a lot of the points that were made this morning come from the fact that in a globalized world, countries are not an island, but they are part of a larger whole. So we have international markets, we have globalization, which means the easy movement of capital, less easy for people, not at all for land, for example, and it's this difference that brings up all the problems. So that's the first thing I think we should keep in mind, and perhaps also go back to the first case from time to time. The second analytical distinction or precision I would like to make is there has been a lot of discussion about investment and the golden rule. I think it's very telling that the Swiss balanced budget rules don't make a distinction between investment and current costs. In my experience, there is a tendency for investment to become bigger and bigger in order to justify their financing through debt. And in the end, you have a situation where investment is the expenditures you like, and all other expenditures are waste. And I think, especially also from the point of view of keeping the political sovereignty of Parliament or the democratic decision maker, we should not create specific rules for investment and for current costs. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais donner la parole tout de suite à M. Schaltegger pour ce dialogue entre Suisse et Suisse.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me la parole. The first question was, why do I think deficit is bad? I think this is a misunderstanding. I didn't say that deficit is bad at all. I mean, the proper sense of debt that has already been said by David Ricardo back in the 18th century, debt is future taxes. There is an equivalence. So I do not really understand the intergenerational thing here, because it's an equivalence. It's formally proved that there is an equivalence between debt and future taxes. So there is not a problem with deficit financing. Deficit financing over the business cycle allows you to smooth taxes. But what I have shown is that you have a political equilibrium in deficit financing, and this is the problem. If you don't reach in balancing the budget over the long term, then you are in a problem, because it's nothing easier than to say that in the long run, all spending have to be covered by taxes or other government revenues. So my problem is not that I don't think deficits are needed. Deficits are needed for smoothing the cycle, but it's necessary to correct the political tendency for deficit financing. Second, empirical evidence. I think strategic use of debt is well-founded, and you have empirical evidence, for example, for Sweden, a very nice paper by Per Pettersson Lidbom in Journal of Political Economy, where he shows that this theory has well empirical grounds. I'm not saying that strategic use of debt is the foremost explanations why we tend to have increasing debt levels, but it is one of all the theories that apply to, or that try to explain why we have this tendency. Same is true, I think the same holds true for the asymmetry in counter-cyclical political actions. For example, take the last Great Recession which we experienced in 2008, 9, or 2009 and 10. Government reacted swiftly, increased spending, some countries reduced taxes to act counter-cyclically. They did it in some circumstances pretty well, I would argue, but it's very, very hard for many governments now to find the exit. And in many countries, Switzerland is, for Switzerland this is true as well, in many countries growth is over potential right now. So you should run in surpluses. Well, we run surpluses a little bit, but I know, and Sweden runs some surpluses, Norway of course, and Israel as well, as I know from the OECD countries. But all the other countries are stick in deficit. So I think there is plenty of evidence that it's much easier for the political process to act counter-cyclically in a phase of economic downturn than in a phase of the boom. Now, the debt brake, as far as I know, the empirical evidence also works in the US context on the US state level, but you have to distinguish between the tax laws and the expenditure laws. And as far as I know the empirical evidence, the expenditure laws, they work pretty much as they should work. They can balance the budget. well, this is not true for, while this is not true for the tax clauses that I know. There is evidence by Jim Koturba for this recently brought up in the literature. Lastly, you mentioned the enforcement problem. Of course, in the Swiss case, where we had a popular referendum, which was the starting point of the fiscal rule, you have some, well, very strong political support, which might act as an enforcement mechanism that politicians think, well, if there is a huge majority behind the rule, we should really stick to the rule. In other countries, probably the Constitutional Court should play the role. In Switzerland, things are a little bit different for the possibilities of the Constitutional Court in enforcing federal laws. Well, this is probably what I had to say. Thank you very much.
Merci. Monsieur Koturba.
I have a small remark that I think is going to help both the philosophical and the more practical discussion. We are ignoring the fact that debt can be restructured, can be renegotiated, it can be also defaulted. This is important to have in mind the relation between generations. A future generation can reclaim its sovereignty on financial issues by ignoring totally the decisions of the former generations and proceed like that. We had in the 20th century more than 400 restructures of the debt. Neither the debt of the Iraqi regime, neither the debt of the Tsarist regime, neither the debt of the Ecuador nor of Argentina have been paid off completely. And that brings us to what is the role of law on that. Because after all, the relationship between creditors and debtors, it's a relation of power. And it's exactly that, ultimately, the role of the law, the Constitution, to regulate and institutionalize this balance of power. In the United Nations, the last General Assembly, Argentina and Bolivia have deposited a proposal for an international treaty that would regulate the basic conditions of treatment of restructuring of the sovereign debt. Because we must have in mind that the debt of the states is not of the same character as the debt between private persons. It is a sovereign debt. And I must say that the position of the European Union was lamentable. The major countries of the European Union, UK and Germany, voted against this resolution. The other countries of the European Union have abstained. This shows also the isolation at this important issue of the European Union, because this resolution has passed with a crushing majority, 111 votes for, 40 abstentions, and only 11 votes against. I mention that because it shows that there is a possibility not to consider that the rules of the market are beyond any kind of political control, but some kind of political control can be reinstituted even at the level of international law, not just at the level of regulation of national markets.
Thank you. Has anyone wants the floor? Yes, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, President. I have some question ask Professor Gosehi. Yeah, I feel very interested in your theory. Just some question, according to your theory and the view, and how long at a maximum level can the generation sovereignty survive? And I just want to know, is there any real legal interest conflict among the different generations, and who will represent the current generation or the future generation? Yeah, I just want to concretize. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This was the last question, and so the last answer.
Oui.
À vous.
So, did I understand the question right that you were asking how long can generational sovereignty survive? Is that right?
Oui, oui.
Yes.
C'est bon.
Yeah, at the maximum level. And that's the meaning, what's the legitimacy of the generation sovereignty? How do you verify? Yeah.
Okay, so I think that I would say two things. First, we shouldn't, so the way we look at generational sovereignty should be slightly different from the way in which we look at sovereignty of a nation. So the example of default rules is very good. Of course, you can have a debt and you can always decide to default, but the problem is that it has some costs for you if you default. And similarly, you can always say, well, I don't care about this constitution, I run a revolution. But of course it has costs to run a revolution. So what this says is that the sovereignty of a generation is probably easier in certain respects to preserve than the sovereignty of a nation. And one of the reasons is that in the realm of generations, there is no equivalent of migration. So you cannot, if two generations are apart from each other, you cannot have an army that comes to another generation. Okay? We are stuck in our generation as if members of the nation were stuck on their territory forever. Okay? And now the other question is, how legitimate is the concern for generational sovereignty? And here I think the basic principle is those who are more affected by a rule should have more say about this rule, so basic demos principle, which means that generational sovereignty should be significant but not unlimited, because a lot of the actions we adopt today have effect on future generations. So to the extent that there are these externalities, there are good reasons to limit our own sovereignty, sometimes in the name of the sovereignty of future generations. So the idea of the extent to which generation sovereignty is a legitimate concern is a real issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Rodriguez-Castillo.
Thank you. I would like to make three small remarks. First of all the examples given here, Switzerland and Norway and even Israel, we are talking about developed, independent, sovereign countries who control their own currency. It doesn't apply to Southern Europe at all. Secondly, and regarding the principle, the constitutional principle / rule issue, what I was saying is, if we are to consider the balanced budget rule as a constitutional principle, which then has to be balanced against everything else in the Constitution, I have no problem with that in itself. If we want to constitutionalize it, and I think this is the position of many, perhaps more conservative constitutionalists in my country, to make it a strict rule against which any cut of any nature in a fundamental right is justified and constitutionally admissible because of the balanced budget rule, then no, because we cannot make this an absolute, there has to be life, and there are other issues beyond the balanced budget. The choice is not between taxes and loans. The choice is between what you do with the money you have. No matter if it's a lot of money or less money, you have this budget and you have to fulfill many states' needs and many states' goals. What the court was saying in its jurisprudence, and it's very noticeable in the 2012 decisions, is we let the first pay cuts pass. We let a lot of measures that seriously affect fundamental rights pass, because we understood that the government had to take immediate measures, urgent measures to tackle with the economic crisis. You've now had a year, and then in 2013, 2 years, and now 3 years to think about alternative measures. So what the court says is not, we don't care about the balanced budget, is that this is not admissible, go and think about something else. To think about something else is not the court's task. It's the parliament and the government's task. So they have to think about alternative measures. There's a lot of things where we can cut, a lot of expenses we can cut. There have been proposals by political parties with parliamentary representation that says, why don't we cut expenses with the absolutely unbelievable public-private partnerships that we have signed, that whereby the government commits to pay a certain amount of money to private companies if the businesses that have been conceded to them do not give them a certain amount of profit. So if that profit is not, if they do not get that profit, the government will pay to compensate them. Why don't we put this into cause? And many people say because that's a contract. And we do not put contracts into cause. But the thing is, the Constitution is a contract. The Catalogue of Fundamental Rights is a contract. It's a social contract. And if we are willing to put that into cause, we must be willing to put everything else and try to find the balance. And of course, that balance is up to the parliament. It's not up to a court, any court. And I wanted to make a final remark because this really worries me. The cuts on social rights, at least this is very visible in Portugal. They're easily compensated by the wealthier part of society. They pay for private education, for private health care. And they live separately from the rest of the population. So these cuts don't affect them, and they even like them. And they are the part of the population with a more public voice and that reach in a more easy way public decision, people who make public decisions. So they have more voice than the common citizen. And what we had a cohesive society where people met at least 3 times in their lives, at school, in hospitals, and in the army. What we are creating now, we have no compulsory military service anymore, and the rich go to private hospitals and to private schools. So we are actually creating a society of strangers, of people who never met, and who are making decisions to people about people and about public services that they don't use, they don't care about, and that don't affect them. This is really, really dangerous in terms of democracy and social cohesion. So it should also be taken into account in constitutional discourse. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add something. To my meaning, democracy only works when you have fiscal equivalence, meaning those who decide on something, those who decide on public goods, have to finance these public goods, can benefit from these public goods. It doesn't work if you spend and if you send the bill to to others. So, in my meaning, there is a misunderstanding of the working of a democracy. And this is also true if you have a common currency, you have decided on joining a common currency with good reasons, I think, with good reasons, because it brought down tremendously your interest rate, your debt service part of the budget. But then, of course, the other side is you have to stick to the rules, because if you are in a common currency, and the common currency is only stable if the whole budget is stable, you have to stick to the rule. This is democracy. I don't see any violation of basic rights.
Merci beaucoup. Bien, alors, nous arrivons à la fin, comme de toutes les bonnes choses, il faut s'arrêter. Les rédacteurs du programme ont eu la bonne idée de ne pas mettre de conclusion ou de synthèse à la fin de notre matinée, mais nous ne pouvons pas nous quitter sans quelques propos de clôture. Bon, les premiers seront pour remercier toutes celles et tous ceux qui nous ont permis de travailler aussi agréablement depuis hier. Nous avons déjà tous remercié Madame Tănăsescu, mais je voudrais véritablement associer toute son équipe universitaire, son équipe logistique, et je voudrais dire à nos interprètes que sans leur capacité à nous comprendre et à nous faire comprendre dans l'autre langue, nous n'aurions pas pu travailler. Et je vous remercie, mesdames, très sincèrement de ce que vous avez fait. Je voudrais également dire que le sujet que nous avons traité depuis hier est devenu de plus en plus fascinant, car nous avons commencé hier matin par quelques communications un petit peu ardues, pour ne pas dire très techniques, et nous venons de finir cette fin de matinée avec quelques grandes interrogations sur la démocratie, les choix, la légitimité de la décision politique, les conflits entre générations, ou la possibilité en tout cas de légiférer pour une durée très longue. Bref, des questions un petit peu existentielles. Et il n'est pas sans intérêt que la dernière question ait été posée par notre collègue chinois, qui représente un pays dont l'histoire est non seulement ancienne, mais extraordinairement importante par rapport à ce que nous connaissons de l'évolution du monde. Donc il est logique qu'il soit encore plus sensible que d'autres à cette dimension temporelle. Bref, nous avions un programme qui s'est bien déroulé et qui nous a considérablement enrichi. Alors peut-être simplement deux observations avant de repasser la parole à Madame Tănăsescu. La première, c'est qu'on s'aperçoit en fin de compte que le droit et par extension le juge sont toujours au centre des processus. On a beau dire tout ce que l'on veut sur la bonne ou la mauvaise gestion publique, nous avons une habitude, presque une contrainte, à essayer d'enfermer dans une règle juridique nos comportements. Et ceci résulte d'une histoire que l'on connaît bien. Le droit est fait pour organiser la vie collective, la vie sociale, essayer d'éviter des crises ou de résoudre les crises selon les cas. Et on s'aperçoit que la crise économique, la crise budgétaire est productrice de normes juridiques, ce qui est quand même un constat intéressant. Et comme il y a normes juridiques, il y a obligatoirement quelque part une autorité chargée d'interpréter la règle juridique. Alors il y a des pays où la Cour constitutionnelle n'est pas compétente, mais si ce n'est pas la Cour constitutionnelle, ça sera éventuellement une autre, ou ça sera une autorité politique. En tout cas, la règle juridique budgétaire implique à un moment ou à un autre son interprétation et sa décision. Et donc nous retrouvons, j'allais dire, des thèmes qui nous sont familiers. Et puis la deuxième observation, elle s'adresse aux membres du comité exécutif de notre association, comité qui se réunira tout à l'heure sous la présidence de notre distingué et excellent président dans cette salle, car je trouve que nous aurions intérêt à explorer pour quelques tables rondes à venir les dialogues avec les autres disciplines. Nous venons d'en faire la démonstration avec l'économie, mais il y a beaucoup d'autres sciences sociales et humaines proches de nous, la philosophie, on en a eu exemple, la sociologie, l'histoire, la géographie, sans parler des sciences que nous appelons en France les sciences dures. Et je crois que le double échange interdisciplinaire et interpays ou interculture juridique serait extrêmement enrichissant pour nous. C'est pas toujours très facile à organiser, car il faut que nous trouvions des vocabulaires communs, sinon nous n'avons pas de dialogue, mais des monologues juxtaposés. Mais je crois que cela serait d'un enrichissement réciproque pour les uns et pour les autres. Et donc, le dernier mot, c'est pour vous remercier encore d'être venu, d'avoir été aussi attentif. Et je redis à Madame Tănăsescu tout le plaisir collectif que nous avons eu à être à Bucarest et tout le plaisir individuel que j'ai eu à revenir ici. Merci.
thank you everybody very much. I wanted also to thank the translators. Thank you once again. Many thanks to all the team, and particularly to the students who have come on a Saturday, and some of them had a written test yesterday, and they have made shifts to be here present, so thanks a lot. Just to let you know, these are students which are no longer mine, so the exam with me is behind, and they have passed. That's a good point for them. And for the logistics, I know it's a very tight schedule, but the meeting of the executive committee is going to be, it's going to take a bit of time, so I do apologize in advance. And now we will have lunch again here in the lobby. At 2 o'clock sharp, there will be a bus downstairs to take those of you who want to join to visit the presidential palace. I have to make 2 caveats. For the presidential palace, you need to have your ID papers with you. They will not let you in without. Secondly, for the presidential palace, you will not be allowed to make photos. It's impossible. They don't let you. Full stop. And then at 3:30, the bus will bring you back from there again here. We shall meet again in this room. I'm sorry I will not be able to join you for the visit, but I will try to arrange the things with the Skype. And see you, the members of the executive committee, at 4 o'clock here. And all the rest of you, you are more than welcome to join us for the dinner tonight. The dinner will be in the official restaurant of the university, courtesy of our rector. The bus will depart again from Sikwa at 7 o'clock. It's 7:30, sorry, it's 7:30, yes? I'm the one who's wrong, it's not the program, definitely. Okay? Oh, no, sorry, yes. Tonight is from here because I presume the meeting will take long enough. So we shall all meet here downstairs for the dinner at the restaurant of the university. And I wish all of you then a safe trip home. Thank you.
Un seul mot pour remercier les paroles de notre président Didier et pour vous demander à tous d'applaudir Simina qui a fait un très beau travail. Merci beaucoup Simina.
Thanks.